There I stood in my white dress, bouquet trembling in my hands, scanning the rows of guests for the two faces that mattered most. My heart wasn't just breaking, it was shattering into 1,000 pieces right there in front of everyone I knew. The ceremony was about to begin. And the front row seats I had saved, the ones with the small reserved cards that read Mom and Dad, sat completely empty. The whispers started almost immediately. I could feel every eye in that chapel shifting between me and those vacant chairs. In that moment, I realized something that would haunt me for years: my own parents had chosen not to show up to the most important day of my life. But here's what nobody knew, including them. That empty chair, that public humiliation, that soul-crushing rejection, it was going to be the very thing that transformed me into someone they could never ignore again. And when they finally came crawling back years later, desperate to be part of my success, I had a choice to make that would define everything. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of how I went from being the forgotten daughter to the woman my parents wished they had never underestimated. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click that subscribe button so you never miss our upcoming videos. What makes a parent choose pride over their own child? What does it take to rebuild yourself when the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally simply walk away? And when success finally comes, when you've proven every doubt wrong, what do you owe the people who abandoned you at your lowest? These are the questions that haunted me for years. Questions I never thought I'd have to answer. But life has a way of forcing confrontations we're not ready for, of bringing us face to face with the very people we've tried to move past. This is a story about rejection and resilience, about building something extraordinary from the ruins of a broken relationship, and about the moment when everything I had worked for collided with everything I had lost. What really happened between that devastating wedding day and the moment I pulled up in a $135,000 Porsche? Why did my parents think they could simply erase 4 years and step back into my life? And what truth would finally set me free? I grew up in a pristine 2-story colonial house in suburban Connecticut where everything looked perfect from the outside. My father, Richard Mitchell, was a corporate attorney who measured success in billable hours and quarterly bonuses. My mother, Patricia, was a real estate agent who obsessed over property values and what the neighbors thought. They weren't cruel in the traditional sense, they didn't yell or hit. But their love came with conditions, with requirements, with a price tag I could never quite afford. I learned early that affection in our household was earned through achievement, and even then, it was dispensed sparingly, like a resource too valuable to waste. My older brother Marcus was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. He played lacrosse, got decent grades without trying, and had that effortless charisma that made our parents beam with pride at every family gathering. I, on the other hand, was the one who had to fight for every scrap of acknowledgement. I remember being 12 years old, bringing home a report card with straight A's and 2 teacher commendations. I walked into the living room where my parents were watching Marcus's lacrosse highlights on the TV, my heart pounding with excitement. Mom glanced at my report card for maybe 3 seconds before saying, "Well, that's what we expect, Sarah. You're a smart girl," and then turned right back to the screen. Dad didn't even look up. That night, I cried into my pillow and made a promise to myself that I would work twice as hard, be twice as good, until they had no choice but to see me. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. High school was a blur of AP classes, debate team championships, and volunteer work that filled every corner of my schedule. I became the girl who said yes to everything, the overachiever who never slept, the perfectionist who measured her worth in accomplishments. I graduated as valedictorian with a full scholarship to a good state university. My parents attended my graduation, but they spent most of the ceremony talking to other parents about Marcus's acceptance into a mediocre business program. During my valedictorian speech, I looked out into the audience and saw my mother checking her phone. That moment crystallized something I had been avoiding for years. I wasn't their daughter, I was their disappointment, the child who existed in the shadow of their favoritism, working desperately for love that would never come. College was the first time I tasted real freedom. I studied business and communications, worked 2 part-time jobs to minimize my loans despite the scholarship, and for the first time in my life, I started making choices based on what I wanted, not what would finally earn my parents' approval. That's when I met Daniel Hayes. He was a year ahead of me, studying automotive design and working full-time at his uncle's auto body shop to pay his tuition. He had grease under his fingernails, a laugh that made my chest feel warm, and dreams of one day opening his own custom motorcycle shop. He treated me like I was someone worth listening to, not someone who needed to prove her value every single day. We spent hours talking about everything and nothing, walking through campus at midnight, sharing dreams over cheap coffee. And for the first time in my life, I felt seen. Completely, genuinely seen. When I brought him home to meet my parents during winter break of my junior year, I actually believed things might be different. I was so naive. The dinner was a disaster from the moment Daniel walked through the door. My father looked him up and down like he was assessing damaged merchandise, and my mother's smile was so forced it looked painful. The questions started immediately. Where did your parents go to college, Daniel? What do they do for work? What are your long-term career prospects? Do you really think working with cars is a sustainable path? Daniel handled it with grace, explaining his passion for design and his business plans, but I could see my father's jaw tightening with every word. After Daniel left, Dad pulled me aside in his study, the room that always smelled like leather and disappointment. "Sarah, you're a smart girl with a bright future," he said, his voice cold and measured. "Don't throw it away on some mechanic with no prospects. You can do better. This isn't about love, it's about building a life, and that young man cannot give you the life you deserve." I felt something crack inside me, a fracture that had been forming for years finally splitting wide open. I looked at my father and saw a man who measured every relationship as a transaction, every person as an asset or liability. And I realized I had been a liability to him my entire life, someone who required investment but never quite delivered the returns he wanted. Mom tried to soften it later, sitting on the edge of my childhood bed. "We just want what's best for you, sweetheart," she said, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. The word best hung in the air like poison. We dated for 2 more years, and in that time, my relationship with my parents deteriorated into polite distance. They didn't ask about Daniel, and I stopped sharing anything meaningful about my life. When Daniel proposed to me on a beach at sunset with a simple but beautiful ring he had saved for months to buy, I said yes, before he even finished the question. I had never been so sure of anything in my life. We set a date for the following spring, found a small but lovely venue, and started planning a wedding on a tight budget. I sent my parents a save-the-date card, then a formal invitation, then a personal email with all the details. My mother responded with a brief text saying they'd received the invitation and would let me know. Weeks passed. I called, I texted, I even drove to their house one Sunday only to find they had gone to visit Marcus. Finally, 3 weeks before the wedding, my father called. His voice was flat, businesslike, as if he was canceling a dentist appointment. "Sarah, your mother and I have discussed this, and we don't feel we can support this marriage. We won't be attending the wedding. If you choose to go through with this, you need to understand that you're making this choice on your own. We love you, but we can't endorse a decision we believe is a mistake." Then he hung up. Just like that. No argument, no discussion, no emotion. Just a final judgment delivered and executed. I sat on my apartment floor for 3 hours after that call, phone still in my hand, tears streaming down my face until my eyes were swollen and my throat was raw. Daniel came home from work and found me there, and he held me while I shook. He looked at me with those steady brown eyes and said, "Sarah, we're getting married because we love each other, not because your parents approve. Their absence will hurt, but their presence while they disapprove would hurt more. Let's marry each other and build the family we deserve." The wedding day arrived with perfect spring weather, everything I had dreamed about except for the gaping hole where my parents should have been. I had asked my college roommate to walk me down the aisle, and she held my arm tight as we moved toward Daniel waiting at the altar. I could feel every guest staring at those empty reserved seats. I could hear the whispers, the speculation, the pity. My face burned with humiliation even as I tried to smile, to focus on Daniel, to pretend that my heart wasn't splintering. And that's when I realized, standing there in front of everyone I knew, that this moment would either destroy me or define me. If this story has your heart racing, comment, "I'm still watching." Let's see who's truly following till the end. The reception was beautiful but hollow, like a movie set that looks real but has nothing behind the walls. On our honeymoon, a modest 3-day trip to a cabin in the Catskills that we could barely afford, Daniel held me while I finally let myself fall apart. I sobbed into his chest and asked the question that had been eating me alive: what is so wrong with me that my own parents can't love me enough to show up for one day? Daniel tilted my face up and said something I would hold on to for years. "There's nothing wrong with you, Sarah. They're the ones who are broken, not you. You are enough, you have always been enough, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you." But life had other plans for testing that promise. 6 months after the wedding, Daniel's uncle decided to retire and close the auto body shop where Daniel had worked for years. Daniel lost his job, and suddenly we went from barely managing on 2 incomes to drowning on one. I picked up extra freelance work, took on every project my boss would give me, and watched our savings account dwindle to double digits. We ate pasta for dinner most nights, turned the heat down to save money, and had whispered conversations in the dark about whether we were going to make it. I kept hoping my parents would call, that somehow they would hear we were struggling and reach out. But my phone stayed silent. No calls, no texts, no concern. It was like I had ceased to exist the moment I said, "I do." The isolation was suffocating. We started fighting about money, about the future, about whether we had made a terrible mistake. One night, after a particularly brutal argument about a shut-off notice from the electric company, I locked myself in the bathroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I looked exhausted, hollowed out, like a ghost of the person I used to be. And I realized something that changed everything. I was letting my parents win. I was letting their rejection define me, letting their absence destroy me, letting their disapproval convince me that I was worthless. And I was done with that. The next morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and started researching online business courses, freelance marketing strategies, personal branding techniques. If my job wasn't going to give me the financial stability I needed, I would create it myself. I spent every spare moment learning, absorbing information like my life depended on it, because in many ways, it did. I started taking on freelance clients outside of my day job, offering social media management and marketing consulting. My first client paid me $200 for a month of work, and I cried when the payment came through because it felt like validation, like proof that I could do this. Daniel got a job at a different auto shop, and while the pay wasn't great, it was steady. We started climbing out of the hole, inch by painful inch. I worked until midnight most nights, laptop balanced on my knees, eyes burning from screen time, but I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. I wasn't working for my parents' approval anymore. I was working for myself, for Daniel, for the life I wanted to build. My client list grew slowly at first, then faster. Word of mouth is powerful, and I delivered results that made businesses take notice. Within a year, I had 15 regular clients and was making more from freelancing than from my day job. I quit the marketing firm, a moment of terror and exhilaration that felt like jumping off a cliff, and committed fully to building my own business. I named it Mitchell and Hayes Consulting, combining my maiden name and Daniel's last name, a small act of defiance and pride. The business became my obsession in the best way possible. I refined my services, hired a virtual assistant, created packages and pricing structures, built a website that actually reflected the quality of my work. I networked relentlessly, attended virtual conferences, joined entrepreneur groups, and learned from people who had walked this path before me. There were failures, plenty of them. Clients who didn't pay, projects that fell through, moments when I questioned everything. But I kept going, driven by a fire that had been lit the day my father told me I was on my own. Every rejection from a potential client, every late payment, every moment of doubt became fuel for the next step forward. I wasn't just building a business, I was building proof that I was worthy, that I had always been worthy, that their assessment of me and Daniel had been catastrophically wrong. 3 years after that devastating phone call from my father, my business had grown beyond anything I had imagined. I had a team of 5 contractors, over 40 clients, and revenue that made my former salary look like pocket change. Daniel had opened his custom motorcycle shop with money we had saved together, and it was thriving. We moved out of our cramped apartment into a real house with a yard where we could breathe. I was making more money than both of my parents combined. My mother made around $80,000 a year selling real estate, my father pulled in about $120,000 from his law practice, and I had crossed the $250,000 mark in annual revenue. The numbers felt like vindication, like proof that I had been worthy all along. But money wasn't enough. I wanted them to see it, to witness what I had built without them, to understand the magnitude of what they had thrown away. Then my cousin Amanda sent me a wedding invitation with a handwritten note saying she hoped I would come, that she missed me. I knew my parents would be there. I knew it would be awkward and painful. And I knew I was going to attend, but not as the broken daughter they had rejected. 2 weeks before the wedding, I walked into a Porsche dealership and test drove a guard's red 911 Carrera. The price tag was $135,000. Daniel asked if I was sure if this was really necessary. I looked at that car, gleaming under the showroom lights, and I knew it wasn't about necessity. It was about a statement, about showing up in a way that left no room for doubt about who I had become. I bought it with a cashier's check, and when I drove off the lot, I felt like I was driving away from every moment of rejection, every tear I had cried on that apartment floor, every time I had been told I wasn't enough. The day of Amanda's wedding arrived with clear skies and warm sunshine. I spent 2 hours getting ready, choosing a sleek navy dress that was elegant without being flashy. Daniel wore a tailored suit, and we looked at each other in the mirror before leaving, 2 people who had survived hell together and come out stronger. When we pulled into the venue parking lot, I deliberately chose a spot near the entrance, visible to everyone arriving. We walked into the venue, and I felt eyes turn toward us immediately. Relatives I hadn't seen in years did double takes, whispered to each other, pointed discreetly at the Porsche visible through the glass doors. I held my head high and greeted everyone with genuine happiness. Amanda ran over and hugged me tight, and I realized this moment wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming my space in a family that had forgotten I existed. And then I saw them. My parents, standing near the bar, froze in mid-conversation as they stared at me. My mother's face went pale, her eyes widening with shock. My father's jaw tightened in that way it always did when he was processing something unexpected. For 3 long seconds, we all just stared at each other across the room. And in that moment, I understood something profound. They hadn't expected me to survive without them. They had believed, genuinely believed, that I would fail, that I would come crawling back, apologetic and compliant. The shock on their faces wasn't just surprise at seeing me, it was the complete destruction of the narrative they had been telling themselves for 4 years. My mother moved first, walking toward me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sarah, sweetheart, I didn't know you were coming," she said, her voice shaking. "You look wonderful." My father followed behind her. "It's good to see you, Sarah," he said stiffly. I smiled, calm and controlled. "It's good to see you too. It's been a while." "For years actually, since you decided not to come to my wedding." The words hung in the air, and I watched my mother flinch. Several nearby relatives stopped their conversations. My father cleared his throat. "Sarah, perhaps we could talk privately." I shook my head gently. "No, Dad. I think here is fine. You made your decision about my life very publicly when you left my wedding seats empty. I think we can have this conversation the same way." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We made a mistake, Sarah," she said quietly. "We were wrong. We should have been there. We've regretted it every day." I studied her face, looking for sincerity, and found only the same concern for appearances that had defined my entire childhood. She wasn't sorry they missed the wedding, she was sorry people knew they missed it. My father tried a different approach. "We've kept up with your success through the family," he said with forced pride. "You've done very well for yourself. We always knew you were capable of great things." I felt Daniel's hand on my lower back, grounding me. "Always knew," I said softly but cutting. "You knew I was capable when I graduated valedictorian, when I won scholarships, when I built a life from nothing after you abandoned me. But you only care now because I have the visible markers of success you value. A business. Money. A car you can brag about. You didn't love the daughter who needed you, you just want to claim the one who doesn't need you anymore." I reached into my purse and pulled out a photograph from my wedding, a wide-angle shot that showed Daniel and me at the altar, and in the foreground, those two empty chairs with their reserved signs. I held it out to my mother, and she took it with shaking hands. "This is what you chose," I said quietly. "You chose to miss one of the most important days of my life, because my husband didn't meet your standards. You chose appearances and pride over your own daughter. And you know what? That choice taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. I learned that I didn't need your approval to be successful, I didn't need your support to be strong, and I didn't need your love to know I was worth loving. Daniel taught me that. So thank you for not coming to my wedding, because it showed me exactly who you are, and it freed me to become who I needed to be." My father tried to speak. "Sarah, you're being unfair. We were concerned about your future." I cut him off. "What you wanted was control, Dad. You wanted me to marry someone you could approve of, someone who looked good on paper. You didn't care if I was happy, you cared if I was successful by your definition. Well, I am successful, more successful than you ever imagined. I built a business from nothing. I bought that Porsche with money I earned. And I did all of it without you. So don't stand here now and tell me you always believed in me." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the faces of relatives around us, some sympathetic, some shocked, all riveted. As the evening wound down, my mother approached one more time, alone. "Sarah, please," she said, her voice raw. "I know we can't undo what we did, but could we try? Could we have coffee, talk, maybe start over?" I looked at her, this woman who had given birth to me but had never really seen me. "I don't know, Mom," I said honestly. "Maybe someday, but not now. I need you to understand that you don't get to skip the hard parts and jump straight to the happy ending. You missed my wedding, you missed 4 years of my life. You can't just show up now because the struggle is over. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be real, not transactional, not based on my success. Can you do that? She opened her mouth, closed it, and I realized she didn't have an answer. It's okay, I said gently. You don't have to answer now. Think about it, and if you figure it out, you know how to reach me. I've had the same number for 4 years. Then I walked out with Daniel, climbed into my Porsche, and drove away. 6 months have passed since that wedding, and my life has continued to grow. My business crossed the $500,000 mark, Daniel's motorcycle shop has a 3-month waiting list, and we're buying a cabin in Vermont. My parents have reached out twice, but I haven't responded yet because I'm still figuring out what I want. What I do know is this: I am enough. I have always been enough. And I will never again measure my worth by someone else's approval. The empty seats at my wedding broke my heart, but they also set me free. I built a beautiful, successful, joyful life. And when my parents finally came looking for me, I was no longer the desperate daughter begging for scraps. I was a woman who knew her worth. And that's when I understood, not every loss is the end. Some are the beginning of something greater. What would you have done if you were in my position? Would you have forgiven your parents immediately, or would you have needed time and space like I did? Do you believe parents always deserve a second chance, or are there lines that once crossed cannot be uncrossed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and I would love to hear your perspective. Tell me, was I too harsh with my parents, or did they deserve every word I said? And if you think this story hit hard, wait till you hear what happened in our next one. Subscribe for more stories that will touch your heart and keep you thinking long after the video ends. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when we post. Thank you for listening to my story, for sitting with me through the pain and the triumph, and for being the kind of audience that understands that real life is messy and complicated and doesn't always have a perfect ending. I'll see you in the next one.